evening, ladies and gentlemen. Was that beautiful or what? Yeah, talk about a tough act to follow. I may as well just close the laptop and get them back here for 5 minutes. Okay, so what we've been doing this week is we've been doing a Blinding Faith mini-series. And do you remember what the passage was that we're focusing on? 1 Peter what? Right, 3:15. And what it is it calls when we have God sanctified in our hearts to have a reason for the faith that is in us. So this week I've been giving 5-minute talks on reasons, both scientifically and philosophical, for the faith that is in us. And what we've looked at this week is everything from the origin of the universe, to origin of life, to where is God in my dark times, and the problem of pain. And tonight we're going to be looking at one of the biggest examples that they use for proof of evolution. And that is the fossil record. And to start talking about the fossil record, you're going to see my high school ways here in a second. I'm going to start talking about Pokemon. Who knows what Pokemon is? Oh, I'm impressed. Okay. You can tell I'm a high school teacher, and what Pokemon are Pokemon, it's a game where you go out in this imaginary world, and you go and catch these little creatures, or little animals, called what? Pokemon, right? And this is huge in high schools. So here's little creatures that you would go out in the imaginary world, and you would go and try to catch these creatures. Now what's really interesting about Pokemon? When you catch them and you train them, over time, what do they do? They evolve. So these little creatures, as you keep them over time, will actually evolve into other animals. So these Pokemon will evolve. So let me give you an example. Anybody know the name of this little guy? This little guy on your far right? It is close. It is Charmander. Okay? So this is a Pokemon. You can see on your far right, the cute little one with big eyes. You would go out and you would catch this Pokemon. And then over time, he would evolve into the next animal in the middle called Charmeleon. And then over time, he would evolve into that big dragon, and he would be known as Charizard. So let me ask you this. If they were to die and become fossilized, what would you expect their fossil record to look like? What would you expect to find at the bottom, very first? The little cute one, or the big dragon? The little cute one, right? So here's what it would look like. On the far right, you would have your little common ancestor. That would be what life started with. Then in the middle, you would have what is known as a precursor, or a transitionary form, and that would be the middle guy. And then on the very end, that big dragon, that would be what we call an observable species. What do you think an observable species is? That's right. So it's the species that we see now. So if we were to go to the woods, we would expect to see our observable species. But the fossil record, if evolution did occur, we should see both the transitionary form and the what? And the common ancestor. So now let's ask this in terms of real life. If evolution is documented in the fossil record, what should the fossil record look like? You would first have a what at the bottom?
The precursor.
That's the common ancestor, and then through the middle you would have precursors or transitionary forms, and then at the very top you would have the species that we now what? And we now see or observe. That's right, so here's what it should look like. This is called Darwin's evolutionary tree. So you can see at the bottom you would have your common ancestor. That would be the basic thing that started all life. According to evolution, that would be a single cell, a single self-replicating cell. Then throughout you would have transitionary forms. So you'd branch off, you'd have some kind of dog or wolf ancestor, some kind of lizard ancestor, etc. And then it would evolve into the top, the little orange circles, which would be the species that we now what? See. Does that make sense so far? Good? That's what we should see if evolution did truly occur. So let me ask you this. What has science actually documented? What has the fossil record actually revealed? Have we got Darwin's tree of life? I want to tell you about two of the biggest fossil finds with regards to evolution. The first one is known as the Burgess Shale. Anybody here ever traveled to BC? Anybody here ever hear of Field BC? Yes, some people have been there. So there was a man named Charles Walcott, and I need to tell you a story because it's mind-blowing. Charles Walcott was what is called a prospector, or he would travel around and look for fossils. So it was 1909, over 100 years ago, and he traveled to Field, BC, and he found one of the biggest fossil finds that ever existed. It's documented in, it's called the World's Big Book of Facts, and it's called this. It says, "What Walcott is remembered for is an incredibly lucky find." Let me tell you the story of how he found his fossils. Charles Walcott was in Field, BC, and he was looking for fossils. He went there, and what would be the vehicle of choice at the time in 1909? A horse, right? So he was there with his horse and his wife, and they were looking for fossils. And it was going into the fall season, and it was starting to become stormy, and what do you think happened to the horse when it hit rock, when it was storming? That's right, the feet kicked out and it slid down a hill. Of course they needed their vehicle, so they went down to look for the horse, and they found that its leg was trapped under a huge rock. So of course, what did they have to do? They had to get the rock off of the horse. And guess what they found when they flipped the rock over? Do you see that fossil on the screen? Yeah. That's what was staring back in his face when they flipped the rock over. This obviously piqued his interest, and he kept searching. And what he documented is known as an explosion of life. And what he found is, look at those words, nearly how many body forms? All. He found evidence of nearly all body forms known in the animal kingdom to date. They called this event the Cambrian explosion of life. Do you know why they called it an explosion? Do you think they had the transitionary forms? There was no transitionary forms. It was just that all of these animals seemed to explode to life at one time in the fossil record. This didn't just happen in Canada, it was worldwide. In 1984, a man named J.Y. Chen found the exact same thing in Shenzhen, China. Time magazine, I stole the picture from online, Time magazine called this evolution's Big Bang. And it proved that this Cambrian explosion of life, this explosion of these animal forms all at once, was worldwide. So here's my favorite part of my presentations. What did they find? I want you guys to help me pronounce these. Sound good? All right, here's a challenge. First one. What do you think? Oh, good job. Okay. Odontogryphus. And what does this look like? This is a flatworm. Do we have flatworms nowadays? Yes, they still exist. Flatworms are still around and documented. Next one. Let's hear it. Perfect. Nerio compacta. And this essentially was just a big insect. This was essentially a beetle. Do we have beetles nowadays? And other types of insects? Yes. So is this showing evolution whatsoever right now? No. Next one. The C is silent. I'll give you a hint. There, perfect. Ctenophora. And this is actually known as a comb jelly, which still exists in the exact same form as the fossil today. Any evolution so far? No. Next one, this is my last example. This one's easy. Chordata vertebrata. Yeah, it kind of rhymes. What does that mean? Well, it basically means that it had a spine. It was a vertebrate. And it was known as the world's first fish. Do we have fish nowadays that look almost identical to this? Any evolution so far? No. What they found is that, have you ever heard of the missing link? The missing link in the human record, evolutionary record? They found that not only is there a missing link for humans, almost every single species in existence today have an incredible amount of missing links. They're all missing their transitionary forms. And if they're missing transitionary forms, then what most likely did not occur? Evolution. All lineages of organisms have these missing links. So instead of this tree of life that Darwin expected, we actually get a lawn. We don't have a tree with a root with a common ancestor branching out the branches. We just have a lawn or orchard of life in which all of the species known today were documented in the Cambrian explosion. This is the two biggest finds in the history of the fossil record. And this is what it documents. Do you think Charles Darwin knew about this? He actually did. What's the famous book that Charles Darwin wrote? On the Origin of Species. This is what he said about the fossil record in The Origin of Species. To the question why we do not find fossils belonging to these earliest assumed periods, I can give no satisfactory answer. Why is there no evolutionary forms in the fossil record? Charles Darwin doesn't know why. They're just not there. He goes on to say, the case at present, so the problems that are in the fossil record for evolution must remain inexplicable. He doesn't know why they aren't there, and may be truly urged as a valid argument against the views here entertained. He just said that the fossil record presents a problem for the theory of what? Evolution, in his own book. Anybody hear of Richard Dawkins before? Probably the world's most prominent atheist at the moment, Richard Dawkins. He went and wrote a book called The Blind Watchmaker, which essentially said that there is no watchmaker, there is no design, it's just a natural process. Watch what he has to say. It is as though the fossils were just planted there, without any evolutionary history. The world's most prominent atheist just said that there's no evolutionary history in the fossil record. Did you catch that? So what can explain this? Clearly evolution doesn't work. The two figureheads of evolution just admitted that the fossil record's a problem. So what could explain this? In creation, in Genesis, it says, so God created the great sea creatures and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded according to their kind. Watch how he stresses kind. And every winged bird according to its kind. Then God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to its kind, cattle and creeping things and beasts of all the earth, each according to its kind. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kind. So everything was made in a certain kind. God clearly states that he made kinds. Look at the fossil record. It is literally a documentation of kinds. Do you remember what Dawkins said? There is no evolutionary history whatsoever. In the Cambrian explosion, all of these body kinds just appeared. But yet God said, in the beginning, he created kinds. Evidence of God's creation is solidified in the fossil record. And I want to end with this story. Here's the man I talked about, J.Y. Chen. In the year 2000, a university in the US, the University of Washington, asked J.Y. Chen to come and present the fossil record, or present the Chenjiang fossils. After the presentation, he had a question and answer period. A professor stood up and asked J.Y. Chen this question. J.Y. Chen came from China, and he asked J.Y. Chen this. Aren't you a little uneasy about questioning Darwinism? Coming from such an authoritarian country. Aren't you scared to question evolution? Watch J.Y. Chen's answer. He stood up, and I remember watching the video. He had a slight smile on his face when they asked him this. He said, no, in China we can question Darwinism, just not our government. In North America, you can question your government, but you can't question Darwinism. I want to end by saying this. Do not be afraid to stand for your beliefs, because God has left evidence all through his creation to back you up. Thank you.